This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
Bob, hey, what's going on today? How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Doing well. Matt's eating barbecue at Roadhog RV Park. How could he be unhappy? I'm in Gainesville. I'm at the campus radio station, WRUF. That's kind of amazing. I've been thinking about this a little bit. We occasionally get accused, those who work on the Razorback Radio Network and on various talk shows, of being given narratives by the athletics department or by people from the university to disperse those narratives out there. None of those are true. Do you imagine what the accusations would be if we actually worked for an ESPN affiliate, Bob, that was owned by the university? Because that's what this station is.
Really? Well, I guess it's the camp. I guess it's the student station. I don't know if it's owned by the university, but I guess they were. I remember when we were in journalism school in Missouri. I mean, there were two school. Well, there was an official school paper, and there was like a little competition of that, and then there was the journalism school paper, which was a daily. And I'm not sure if they were owned, but certainly we had professors who were editors and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so you're not just reading everything off a sheet you get every day?
No, we never get a daily email from Hunter Yurachek or Kevin Trainer or any of the coaches as to what my talking points are for the day. I've never asked for those either. So, yeah, I think we all understand how this is supposed to operate, and it does. Bob Knight dies yesterday, Bob. I don't know if you ever covered a game that he coached or were in on any of his press conferences, but you've covered college basketball for a long, long time. And, man, there really weren't many people any larger in the sport than Bobby Knight. I wondered how you felt about that today.
Well, you actually covered one of his games when he was not in Indiana, but, actually I covered a UALR Indiana game at Bloomington like a million years ago, and that would have been probably in the late 80s. And then he brought Texas Tech to North Little Rock when Stan Heath was like 07 maybe, and they beat Arkansas. And the year before, Arkansas had beaten him and Knight and Texas Tech down in Dallas. So he coached against the Razorbacks a couple of times when he was at Texas Tech. And yeah, I remember, Arkansas and Indiana were bracketed to play in the 1991 Southeast Regional Final. Arkansas was the 1 seed and Indiana was the 2. And Kansas messed that up. They beat Indiana in the Sweet 16, and they upset Arkansas in the regional final, went to the Final Four with Roy Williams. So Nolan Richardson, I don't think Indiana ever played Tulsa when Nolan Richardson was there. So almost had a Nolan Richardson-Bobby Knight matchup in, I think it was Atlanta. And that would have been a lot of fun to see. But, yeah, I mean, I was around him a little bit. I think I asked him a question or two at that post-game press conference with Tech, and he was kind of gruff, but, whatever. And I do remember him coming to Fayetteville in the spring of +94. He was going to meet with Eddie Sutton because Alvin Robertson and Joe Klein, who played for the Razorbacks, were among like 100-something plus players trying out for the Olympic team. They both made it, which is really, really tough to make that team. It was all college guys, but Charles Barkley, I know, was one of the guys that was cut, didn't make the cut. But I remember he pulled into it. We kind of staked out Barnhill. He didn't talk to us, but he pulled in to Barnhill. He had a little sports car, and he said something like he'd been at Fort Smith looking at the judge. Who's the judge there? Is Judge
Parker.
Judge Parker. Yeah, he'd been there seeing Judge Parker stuff. And but he didn't really give us an interview. But he went in and talked to Eddie Sutton, and so yeah, I was around him at a couple of regionals, just in those big press conference settings. But yeah, he was definitely a larger than life person, and I've talked to some people. Going to have hopefully a good story on this tomorrow. But he had a lot of connections to the Razorbacks. Like I say, Coach Joe and Alvin in the Olympics. Bill Musselman, Eric Musselman's dad, and he were very close, and Eric knew him. He's smart, of course. Arkansas assistant coach played for Bob Knight and hit one of the biggest shots in NCAA tournament history to give Indiana what turned out to be Bob Knight's last championship in '87. Ronnie Brewer played against that Texas Tech team, so a lot of Razorback connections to Bobby Knight, and certainly it's sad news. If you followed him in recent years, you knew he was in ailing health and battling dementia, but I know that you can find these videos out there. In 2020, I believe it was, maybe in February, Indiana was playing Purdue, and he finally came back. He'd moved back to Bloomington, but he had steadfastly refused to go to any Indiana games. He still had a grudge with the administration for firing him, and he finally, all the players, wanted him to come back, and fans and everything, and finally he came back, and there were about 50 players. Keith Smart was one of them. If you see the video, you see Isaiah Thomas, you see some other guys there, and he finally got acknowledged at halftime of that game. Gene Cady was there, the former Purdue coach, the coach that was an assistant coach for at Arkansas, and that was a very emotional thing. He was in ailing health. You kind of tell he was kind of, not moving around real well, but still obviously glad that happened when it did, before he passed away, because, that's something that needed to happen, and they finally kind of, the glacier kind of thawed on that.
Bob, we were talking earlier, they were talking about how the General Bobby Knight had a class on campus up there, and with that talk of, Peyton Manning teaching a class on campus, which one of those classes would you take, and then who would you take? Like, what would be the guy that, if they were coming in to, as far as a coach, who would you want to go sit in their classroom?
Well, when I was at Missouri, I actually attended a basketball 101 class that Norm Stewart taught, the Missouri coach. I will say about half the time he had an assistant coach do it, but that was kind of fun. And I think a lot of us were in there just thinking, this would be cool and real easy, and we get to be around Norm Stewart. So it was pretty hard. I think I got a B. I didn't even get an A. I was kind of embarrassed. But it was sort of about, coaching, like how to do practices, how to, run a practice, how to put a schedule together. Like I say, it was coaching 101. It's kind of the basics for a coach. And I didn't have any aspirations for being a coach. I just thought it would be fun. Of course, I later covered Norm Stewart as a student reporter. But, yeah, that would be real. I'm sure Bobby Knight would be a pretty tough grader and pretty strong disciplinarian. You better show up. You better not cut class. You better not be talking. But I think I'm sure he would have been. He was one of the great, he was one of the great teachers, I think, of basketball. I saw this on Twitter last night, so it must be true. But it said that of all the players he coached in Indiana, the only one who was an NBA All-Star was Isaiah Thomas. And if you start thinking about it, guys like Keith Smart, Steve Alford, Randy Whitman, Ken Benson was a high draft pick, but he didn't turn out to be a star. Calbert Chaney he had some good players in the NBA, but not, Hall of Fame type guys, Isaiah Thomas being the exception, which tells you he always had a lot of really good players, but not superstars. And honestly, the superstars, remember, some people may know this, Larry Bird went there, and he transferred to Indiana State, I think just because he just couldn't handle Knight. And Larry Bird at that time was very shy, and he just couldn't handle Knight's personality, I don't think. Well, and obviously, basketball genius. Think about Bobby Knight could have coached Larry Bird for 4 years, but, we'll never know what would have happened. But I think the way, talking to some guys that played for him, this very rings true with Eddie Sutton, too, as far as teaching fundamentals. This sounds maybe crazy, the right way to do a chest pass, a bounce pass, how to set a screen, how to come off a screen, how to fight through a screen, how to pump fake. I just think he was one of the great teachers of basketball fundamentals, and that's why Indiana was always so good, and Texas Tech, he raised a little of that program, too. They were always so good because they were so fundamentally sound. They may have not had as much talent as some teams, but they probably beat a lot of teams that had more, on paper talent because they just executed their offense and their defense so well.
Well, he ran a clean program, but he was also a bully. I mean, that's just how he acted towards reporters, towards broadcasters at times, towards his own players, certainly towards officials. But everybody's complicated. I mean, you got to take the good with the bad with people. But he ran a clean program. Not only did Indiana never come under any sort of sanctions while he coached there, or Texas Tech, there was never even any rumors about that kind of stuff. I mean, it was just understood that's a clean program. And you balance that against, look at what's going on in Michigan right now, where Jim Harbaugh, man, he's been caught cheating twice now in the last 2 years or 3 years. One of them recruiting violations during the COVID era. Now this sign stealing thing in which he says he's got no clue about it, and that's really a bunch of bull crap.
Malarkey.
So, Yeah, I mean,
Hooey, hooey, that's a good word.
Yeah, that's the right way to put it. But I mean, that's what I'm thinking about here. You got one coach that's got this complicated legacy that just passed away. The complication has everything to do about how he treated people, not his ability to strategize or coach players. And all these players he coached graduated. And now you get another guy like Harbaugh, who's obviously a good coach, but he cheats. And you get a whole fan base that's trying to back him up and defend him and everything. And, man, this sign-stealing thing, the more that comes out about it, the more bizarre it gets.
Yeah, and get back to Bob Knight for a minute. He was very complicated. I mean, when I talk to people, that's one thing. He's very complex, very complicated. It's funny. He demanded discipline and everything from his players, and if you don't be as disciplined, because you have a lot of great, like Landon Turner, people – remember, he was a great player. He was paralyzed in a car wreck, and Bobby Knight basically made sure that Landon Turner would be taken care of the rest of his life, raised a lot of money to help him out. I've heard stories of his, generosity towards people that, he never wanted publicized. We know about throwing the chair. We know about him getting arrested in Puerto Rico for getting into with a police officer, kind of being the ugly American. We know about him, treating his, administration in Indiana with disrespect, which, you shouldn't do. Like, what would he do if one of his players said to him what he said to his athletic director or president, But, he's a complicated guy. There was a lot of good. There was a lot of bad, if you want to call it that. But it's hard to separate the two. But, you can't. He was a great basketball coach. No, I don't think anybody can dispute that. But, and getting back to Harbaugh, it really strikes me as, to me, it's a college football version of Watergate. Because if people are old enough to remember, Richard Nixon was not going to lose his re-election campaign. But he cheated, and did all the dirty trick stuff to make sure. And then he covered it up, which made it worse. And then he ended up being the only president to resign. And, people may – and I get, sign stealing is part of the game. But it's one thing if you're looking at the other sideline, you're trying to pick things up. Just like in baseball, batter's trying to steal signs. Or a guy out at second base is trying to steal signs from the catcher, but if you're filming the signs from center field secretly, and then you can break down the film, like what the Astros were accused of doing a few years ago, that's totally different. And Michigan's good. Michigan should not have to cheat to beat, to win games. And you're right. The more you hear about it, the worse it gets. And the idea that Jim Harbaugh didn't know, it's kind of like Nixon. Well, you either knew about it or you orchestrated it. Either way, either you didn't know what was going on in your own program or your own administration, or you let it. And either way, it's bad. But you try to tell me this subordinate guy spent thousands of dollars on travel and that wasn't okay, and then he's standing next to these coaches telling them things. I mean, give me a break. I mean, it's clear they cheated, and I don't know if it's going to come back on them or not, but it's a really bad look for Michigan, and they take a lot of pride in it. As much as they want to win, I really wonder if Harbaugh can survive this, because it's very scandalous, and it just reflects very poorly on Michigan, which basically thinks of themselves as an Ivy League school, except for football, of course.
BetOnline is your #1 source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts.